Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by two Harvard graduates. Lulu Curiel is in San Francisco. She's the founder of Ivy Advisors, a consultancy that helps people get into the most prestigious colleges. And Terence Patterson is the CEO of Memphis Education Fund in Tennessee, a philanthropic group which works to improve the quality of teaching and resources in low-performing schools. I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers. Terence, let me start with you. Did the college admissions scandal surprise you at all?
You know, it was mixed, right? On the one hand, you know that folks will do whatever it takes to the extent that they have resources. But then it was surprising to think that someone would step out of bounds to get into top tier institutions in the country. So, yeah, it was surprising, but on the other hand, you can kind of understand where it was coming from.
So, Lulu, given the weight of evidence, is it clear to you, as it is to many other people, that rich parents are bribing Ivy League colleges to get their kids through the door?
Sure, thank you for having me. As the evidence shows, some people are bribing their way into college, but I would like to say not all of them. There are some wealthy, hardworking parents who accumulated wealth, and there's nothing wrong with that. And some of them are following the rule of law and the rule of ethics in order to sustain their children. At the same time, there are others who are hardworking people with grit and fight, and they're willing to work harder than the average person, and they're still getting.
Terence, is it hard for Ivy League colleges to say no to the kids of people who just gave them $1 million?
You know, of course it's hard, right? People are making significant investments into the institution, but there is a very high ethical bar at these institutions. So while it is hard to say no, an overwhelming majority of the time they are saying no. And this is an unfortunate situation where you've got a few bad actors that have now poisoned, again, a very competitive situation, a very competitive system to begin with.
Right. Terence, you say competitive, but for many others, they say it goes beyond competitive. It's just unequal. It's way too hard to get in if you're just an ordinary person and much easier if you're rich. That's the reality. Is that fair?
No, it's not fair. And look, I'm an ordinary person. I grew up in Memphis. I was hardworking. I played collegiate sports. I played multiple sports in high school. I did everything that was asked of me, and my application was competitive, and it allowed me the opportunity to get in. And I think when you walk on campus, when you visit these places, when you talk to admissions counselors, there are a lot of folks like me from all across the country, all across the world that are attending these top tier institutions. So yes, it is competitive. On some levels, is it unfair? Potentially, but it is competitive. And if you do everything that's asked of you, you will have a top chance to get into these institutions.
Lulu, is it easier to game the admissions system if you were lucky enough to be born with a rich mom or dad?
I want to decouple the question. I think the question is wealth and then being admitted. Wealth buys you resources. That's absolutely true. But having resources doesn't translate to getting in. The analogy that I usually use for admissions is that think of it as competitive sports. You can have the best coach. With money, you can buy, hire the best private coach, buy the best equipment. But at the end of the day, it depends on the power and the grit and the talent of that athlete. No matter what resources you have, you might not make it to the Olympics. And what William Singer did here is the equivalent of providing steroids to an athlete. So does wealth buy an entrance to an Ivy League institution? I would say not in absolute terms. Some people, as we've seen in the news, they cross the boundaries and they do get in. That should be an exception. But in the norm, it's not the case.
But Lulu, fine, right? You might still go to the Olympics and suck, right? Because if you're not smart enough to pass through Harvard, you're going to be exposed at some point. But the argument is when people are gaming this system, they're depriving somebody else who might have been better deserving of getting through the door. So how many people do we know of who couldn't get through the gate because some rich kid had their parents giving a grant to the college? Isn't that a major scandal in your eyes?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely a major scandal. I don't excuse any of the people who did the horrible actions they did. And I do believe the real victims here are the hardworking students who were displaced because some people were doing the unethical thing. And it sends the wrong message because there are some highly, invested students who are trying to get into these institutions, and they're looking at this and they go, that's disheartening. It is a scandal. It is shocking. That should not be the standard.
Yeah, and I guess, Terence, as somebody who has been in a hiring capacity within the US, looking at resumes coming through, I can admit that I remember when resumes were coming through, the second I saw Harvard or the second I saw Yale on somebody's resume, I was like, okay, we probably need to hire this person, right? Are they doing this because of the brand value of these institutions? Is that something we need to question as well?
No, so I don't think you question the brand value of the institution, right? Because the institutions are strong, and we should remind folks that this is a overwhelming minority of the population that is gaming the system, right? So the brand value is strong because the quality of the students that are attending these institutions is strong. And the other thing we got to keep in mind is the yield rates are extraordinarily low, right? So there are lots of folks that work hard, that do the right things, that don't get in, and the same number of folks that are gaming the system and not getting in as well, right? So it is competitive from a standpoint that there is such a small number of folks that are getting in, but we should not question the brand value because an overwhelming majority of the students and the graduates from these institutions are strong, they're qualified, and they are really living up to the quality and the standard of the institutions.
Okay, so Lulu, the scandal broke. People are talking about it now. Others are looking for solutions. There's a senator, U.S. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, who says he has a solution. He announced he's drafting legislation that would remove tax deductions available to donors in these circumstances. Is that going to make a difference at all?
Does it make a difference in terms of making the system more fair? And I think it's minimal. There are donors who will continue to donate because their heart is in the right place. They want to fulfill a certain mission. You have the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation. They're trying to change the education system. You have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Sure, they get a tax deduction, but I doubt that they will stop doing whatever they want to do just because the tax deduction is taken away. Will the admissions, and we have to look at the percentage of people who donate money and get in. It's not the majority. And by the way, those who donate, if they're building some construction and they're building a program that enables hundreds of others to fulfill a career in STEM or whatever subject that's relevant to them, then that's up to the institution to decide.
Although I would love to see Harvard, for example, come forward and say, hey, we took $500,000 from so-and-so. They applied to get their kid into the school, but they didn't meet the standard, and sorry, you didn't make it. That would be fascinating, and I'm looking forward to getting Harvard on the program. Terence, let me ask you, do you think it makes a difference?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Terence, do you think it makes a difference if you take the tax deductible away? Do you think it's possible that this might make a difference, or is the senator just trying to sort of, I don't know, put a Band-Aid over this?
Yeah, look, it could create a deterrent, but the reality is folks are going to continue to find ways to game the system and systems. So this system is not unlike other systems around the world, right? So it could help deter, but there'll always be bad actors. And I do laud the senator for coming up with a creative solution that will reduce or mitigate the chances of things like this happening. And I'll also note, it's not just the folks that are making $1 million and multi-million-dollar contributions to universities whose children are getting in, right? There are folks, there are annual campaigns, folks are contributing $100 a year, $1,000 a year, $10,000 a year because they love their institution, right? And so this is not just a multi-million-dollar problem. And just because you donate money to an institution, it does not give you a sense of entitlement or a ticket into the institution either.
Terence and Lulu, I really enjoyed talking to the two of you. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Let's go to New York now, where we're joined by Daniel Golden. He's a senior editor at ProPublica, a nonprofit organization that broke the story, and author of The Price of Admission, How America's Ruling Class Buys Its Way into Elite Colleges. Daniel, great to have you on The Newsmakers. So I've just spoken to two Harvard grads, Terence and Lulu, who both say, well, the scandal is a clear example of, I guess, the abuse of power, and it's a small minority of rich parents doing what they can to get their kids into Ivy League colleges. And the fact that people have been charged over this, it shows that something's being done about it. Is that accurate to you?
Well, to me, I think it has broader significance than that. It's kind of a window into how the college admissions process in general favors the wealthy and the celebrated through a variety of what I call the preferences of privilege. Preferences for alumni children, known as legacies, preferences for development admits who are children of non-alumni who are likely to give generously, and preferences for recruited athletes, including those who play upper crust sports that most kids never have a chance to participate in, like crew. I also think it spotlights a growing problem, which is the wealthy parents bypassing traditional guidance counselors at their kids' high schools to use independent counselors like this fellow Singer who masterminded this scheme, those counselors, unlike the traditional ones, are not paid by the high school. They're only beholden to the wealthy parent. And if the client wants to stop at nothing to get their kid into an elite college, then that's what the independent counselor is supposed to do. So I think it's a lens onto a bigger problem than just a few people.
Right. And when we look at that bigger problem, the fact that these academic institutions have massive brand value, they're a ticket to a good life for a lot of people. And they're also businesses. Is that at the heart of it, the fact that it's so valuable to have that name on your resume? And on the other hand, if you have money, you can get in.
Yes, it's an interesting question. Exactly, why is this so valuable to these families? Because even if their kids didn't go to an elite college, they would be set for life financially anyway, because these are extremely rich families. But there's something about the status or the brand or feeling you're in the club of American power that makes it very appealing to these parents. And if you pay enough, if you contribute enough, you enhance your kids' chances a lot. What this guy Singer essentially was selling was certainty. He was saying, well, maybe even a big donation wouldn't be enough to get your kid in. But in this case, I'm going to bribe people to falsify the test scores. I'm going to bribe the college coaches to portray your kid falsely as a recruited athlete. And then it's an ironclad guarantee, even better than a donation.
I want to ask you about the president's son-in-law and the fact that his father, Charles Kushner, pledged $2.5 million to Harvard, and very soon after, Jared went to Harvard and he was admitted. Is that a clear case of Harvard, I guess, finding it very difficult to say no to an offer they couldn't refuse?
Yeah, it is a case of that, and I first described that in my book, The Price of Admission, in 2006, even before Jared was well known. But the father pledged $2.5 million, and the view of his Jared's classmates, and the staff at his high school was that he was not an outstanding student. He wouldn't have gotten into Harvard absent this donation. And the father also met with the president of Harvard to indicate that he planned to be generous to the university. It's also noteworthy that Jared's parents were not alumni. They had no previous connection to Harvard when they made this gift. So it seems that it was tied to his admission, which indeed came to pass. But he's no different than many other development admits whose parents pay large sums to get them into elite colleges.
And so renewed interest in your book, which was written 13 years ago, right? Tell me, if you can, if there's a difference between the zeitgeist now, the way the public views the scandal now in 2019, to when you first came out with evidence showing that this is happening 13 years ago?
Well, my book caused a big stir 13 years ago, but I think now there's even more outrage. For one thing, there's a lot of attention now paid to income inequality. which has gotten worse after the financial crisis than it was when I wrote my book. And income inequality means that there's a lot more very rich people who can afford to make these donations. It also means there's a lot more poor kids who don't have those advantages. Also, these colleges have become even harder to get into than they were when I wrote my book for the ordinary applicant, even more selective. And so it's even more frustrating to a family that doesn't have the kind of wealth to increase their chances. So I do think we're kind of in a perfect storm situation of public unrest about this.
Daniel Golden, real pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thanks so much for joining us.